so much for joining us tonight. My name is Tessa O'Connell, and I'm the Communications and Public Outreach Manager at the Natural Areas Conservancy. Thank you so much for joining us for tonight's virtual event, Creating a Network of Trails for All New Yorkers. Before we get started, I just wanted to give a quick rules of the road. We're on Zoom webinar right now. So to ask questions of the panelists during the event, please feel free to use the chat function. And right now, we'd love for you to introduce yourself. We always love to know who's joining us for these events. So definitely put your name in the chat and just share where you're tuning in from while we get settled. And I think there'll be some interactive questions throughout the event. So keep your eyes peeled in the chat. We might want to know kind of, your experience with hiking, or if you've visited certain parks and things like that. So tonight we are joined by our NYC Trails team and a few other important guests. They are going to introduce our new strategic trails plan for New York City. The Strategic Trails Plan and our current work to implement the plan have been made possible through 2 grants from the Leona M. and Harry B. Helmsley Charitable Trust. We want to thank the Helmsley Trust for their visionary investment in the program. And I'd like to introduce Tracy Prizeau. She is the program officer for the Helmsley Trust New York City program, and she has been a true thought partner and supporter in creating this program. We really appreciate Tracy's partnership and the Helmsley Trust's partnership, and look forward to hearing from her in just a minute. After we hear from Tracy, we will hand things over to Kristen Phillips, who is from REI, and she is our moderator and host for the evening. So here's Tracy.
Thank you, Tessa. Welcome, everyone. My name is Tracy Prizeau, and I am the program officer at the Helmsley Charitable Trust. For those who don't know us, the Helmsley Charitable Trust is a global philanthropy committed to helping people live better lives today and creating stronger, healthier futures for individuals in their community. I work here in our New York City program, and here we're dedicated to improving the health stability of New York City's population with the greatest needs. To do that, we focus on improving healthcare delivery and access, advocating for mental health services, helping high needs patients, and prioritizing nature in our health. As most of you probably know, research finds that people living near parks and green spaces have less mental distress, are more physically active, and have extended lifespans. We know our physical environment is closely intertwined with our health and well-being, which is why we are invested to ensure more New Yorkers can access all the benefits of trees and nature in their own communities. Ultimately, we hope to have the greatest effect for New Yorkers with the greatest needs, which is why we're especially proud that projects like this one, expanding trail improvement work in under-resourced parks and neighborhoods, help make it easier for everyone to connect with wild nature. Congratulations to the Natural Areas Conservancy team and everyone involved in bringing this strategic plan to life. Like all of you here today, we're so excited to see this plan come to fruition. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kristen Phillips from REI.
Thank you so much, Tracy, for those opening remarks. And I can't agree with you more about the importance of this program and what the NAC is going to accomplish through this strategic trails plan. REI is honored to host this event because it's an inspiring project and we're committed to seeing it come to life. I have a question for the chat box. I'm loving seeing where everyone is coming from. But I'm also curious, how many of you have been hiking on trails in New York City before? How many of you have actually enjoyed some of these outdoor recreation hiking opportunities within the 5 boroughs? Go ahead and let us know in the chat, and let us know if you have a favorite trail as well. The Natural Areas Conservancy has been part of REI's local grant program for the last 5 years because of their commitment to stewarding and maintaining our remaining natural areas. These natural areas that benefit the health of all New Yorkers and expand access to much needed recreational opportunities. There's no better example of this than the Strategic Trails Plan. REI believes time outside is fundamental to a life well lived, and that our connection to nature is essential to to the health and well-being of all people and communities. This is as true in small towns as it is in densely populated concrete jungles like New York City. A lot of us have discovered or rediscovered just how much these places mean to us during the pandemic, but even before the pandemic, we were spending way too much time inside. A study from the Harvard School of Public Health showed that the average American was spending 95% of their life indoors pre-pandemic. The same study showed that even just 20 minutes per day spent in nature can lower stress hormone levels, boost self-esteem, and improve mood. And the good news is that there are some amazing pockets of nature with over 300 miles of trails that you can experience right here in the 5 boroughs. Places like Prospect Park or Pelham Bay or Van Cortlandt, the Strategic Trails Plan will provide organized, well-maintained access to them. And because the more we value and appreciate our outdoor and natural spaces on a personal level, the more likely we are to engage in the fight to protect them. REI feels strongly that we have to make the time to get outside for our own well-being on a regular basis. And we must value our outdoor natural spaces to the point where we realize deeply we cannot live without them. Our physical and mental health, the health of our communities, and the health of our planet all depend on it. And that's why the Strategic Trails Plan is so important to us. It has the potential to transform the city we live in and make it a healthier, more climate-friendly environment for all its residents, simply by providing that quiet, human-powered access to nature. And the best part is that in New York City, we don't need a car. We can get there on foot, by bike, or public transit. So that's just a little bit about what REI brings to this Trails project and the larger conversation around getting outside closer to home more often. For us, it's about priorities, and it starts by showing up to a presentation like this to learn more about this Trails plan and how you can get involved. And with that, I would love to pass the mic over to Julia Raskin from the Natural Areas Conservancy to introduce our amazing Citywide Trails team.
Thank you, Kristen. Hi, everyone. My name is Julia Raskin. I'm the Trails Program Manager at the Natural Areas Conservancy. For those of you who are not yet familiar, the NAC is a nonprofit partner to New York City Parks, and we help to manage and restore 10,000 acres of forests and wetlands. And we've been doing that since 2012. Our team of scientists and experts promote nature's diversity and resilience across all 5 boroughs, and we work in close partnership with the City of New York. Since 2017, we've worked in partnership with the Parks Department on the Citywide Trails Team. And we work to formalize and maintain the nature trails going through these natural areas throughout all 5 boroughs. So thanks again for attending today to celebrate the release of the Strategic Trails Plan. The plan is a blueprint for the management of the Citywide Nature Trail Network, which is made up of over 350 formal and informal nature trails that offer parkgoers a range of experiences, from forests to coastal wetlands and marshes, all of which connect people to the vast natural areas in New York City parks. So another big thank you to the Helmsley Charitable Trust for generously giving us a 3-year horizon to build out the Trails program in close partnership with the Parks Department, using this as our blueprint. And also a really big thank you to REI for their continued support of the different initiatives and facets of our work that will allow us to implement this plan. And thank you in advance for putting your questions in the chat again. So I'm going to start some slides here. All right, can everyone see those? Great. So today the Citywide Trails team is going to talk about the benefits of trails, both for the environment in New York City and also for the communities that use these spaces. Gabriel Cummings, our Trails Operations Lead, will discuss the importance of using trails to access nature and how successful trail management contributes to the health of urban forests. And then Josh Otero, our Trails Community Engagement Coordinator, will discuss our model for trail stewardship, the importance of community involvement in the natural areas, and how you can get involved in stewarding your local trail network. So I'm going to hand it over to Gabe.
Oh, I was on mute, sorry. Thank you, Julia, and thank you everybody for joining us today. We're really excited to be discussing New York City trails with everybody here. And let's just jump right in it. So I'm going to be starting off by going over access to nature and why it's important for New York City. So let me just pull this up. Great. So as Julia mentioned, there are over 300 miles of hiking trail within New York City parks, which I think surprises a lot of folks when they first think about New York City trails. Not a lot of people are very familiar with the system. So it is something that jumps to mind when first talking about trails in the city. And we consider trails to be our portals into our natural areas here in New York. And since 2017, we have focused on trail formalization, trail improvements, and restoration projects across the city. More specifically, with access to nature, corridor pruning and invasive removal helps improve access and navigation throughout our trails. So I'd like us to take a quick tour to Cunningham Park in Queens and take a look at these two photos that we have here. If we look at the left, it's extremely overgrown, invasive shrubs. There's vines that are growing all the way up. You can hardly see the street sign. And it's really difficult to discern the trail from the road. So as part of our work with the trails team, we had pruned the corridor, did extensive invasive removal at the site in advance of our installation of trail markers, which took place on the Orange Trail last year. The Cunningham Park map is completed, and we're working to get that map on the New York City Parks website. Next slide, Julia. Great. So another big factor to access to nature is sustainable trail design. And sustainable trail design considers drainage, slope, and other ecological factors. We have a diversity of trail experiences here within New York City parks, ranging from low-lying wetlands to steep sections of trail in the greenbelt that can get over 400 feet tall. So within sustainable trail design, one thing to note within New York City is that majority of New York City trails were not intentionally designed. A lot of these trails were informal nature trails that led from people's homes or from a parking lot or other recreation area that were adopted by New York City parks. So not all of our trails across the system are going to have this sustainable trail design in mind. And what that also includes is, if we look at these photos, it's a great example of a lot of the different techniques that that we employ to help implement this design across the city. So looking at the left, we're at Pelham Bay Park now. So we jumped up to the Bronx, and we are looking at about 2 to 4 inches of standing water and a 6 to 8 foot wide trail. This is the Seawanoy Trail, which I definitely recommend checking out. And people were going around this low-lying muddy area. There was invasive vines on the edge. And so the trail was getting wider and more impassable. And so in this case, we're not always able to get to higher ground. So the trails team decided to install puncheons to improve access. So we built 72 feet of puncheon here to mitigate the erosion issue. And it's a management technique that we use quite often. For structural installations can help mitigate erosion issues. In severely degraded areas, trail reroutes or restoration plantings are considered for places that were not able to make structural improvements or drainage improvements on the trail. Next slide. Great. So going into trail maintenance, just more specifically, we have a couple different buckets that we are commonly working on across New York City parks. 2 of them we mentioned a bit already, which include corridor pruning and invasive removal. And if we're looking at these photos at Alley Pond Park, it's a great example of why that's such a big focus. We complete this work through a combination of the Citywide Trails Team, Parks, Conservancy partners, and volunteers, such as the trail maintainers, which Josh will discuss a little bit later in our presentation. And looking at the left here, the trail's barely discernible. It's hard to notice where the path is. And there was also poison ivy and a couple of downed trees from recent storms that were blocking the trail. So a couple of social trails were actually created around to go around the trail, which can lead to forest fragmentation. So we came in and pruned the corridor, addressed the obstacles and invasive removal to help restore trail access. And that is a very common issue across the citywide trail system. So keeping open corridors, well-maintained treads, and addressing the erosion issues within our parks will allow us to have a better overall quality system. So the right photo, you can see the trail is really well established and grubbed out, and a very clear tread, so folks know where they're hiking along the trail. Next slide, please. Great. So another big aspect to access to nature is our work on trail formalization. And a big part of that work is ground truthing the trails using GIS, so walking every mile of trail to do a full citywide inventory. That took place between 2013 and 2015, where we were able to map every single mile of trail to get to our 350 plus network that we have currently. So from that mapping exercise, it gave us the resource information that we needed to know to make informed management decisions, to create public facing maps, to install trail markers as well. And that's what we're seeing on these two photos. We have an awesome volunteer installing blue trail markers at Forest Park, which I know got a lot of shout outs in the comments so far for Forest Park, so that's great. And we have Riverdale Park on the right. And a lot of the formalization installations are done with volunteers. So a big thanks to all the volunteers who've helped us over the years with that. And this directly improves trail access and navigation because public facing maps create a sense of security and knowledge, for the public when going out to the natural areas to be prepared for where they're going to go to help plan their route. And the trail markers allow us to have a guide when we're in the natural area exploring some of our favorite places. Next slide. Great. So since 2016, there have been 19 parks across our system, or about 25% of all the parks in New York City have been formalized thus far. And there's about 136 miles of formalized trails. So these are official designated New York City Parks trails, of which 43 are blazed. So here we are now at Inwood Hill Park, and this is just a photo of the map that you can find on the website, and it has a breakdown of the trails by name, so orange, blue, and white trails here. It also includes very important things such as park amenities, scenic viewpoints, trail descriptions, and the main access areas. So folks can come in, visit Inwood Hill Park, make a plan for where they want to see or where they want to go, and be able to just hop on the trail and go for a hike. And trail formalization and improvement projects also play a large role in healthy forests, which we're going to transition to next. Great. So what is a healthy forest? If we look across New York City, we're going to find that it's a forest that has a native canopy, an understory, a high ecological condition. We're going to see a multi-tiered forest structure, so understory, mid-story, and overstory or canopy. And there's also going to be indications of native regeneration as well. And so if we look at these two photos here, we have Cunningham Park and Inwood Hill Park. And these are just two very nice examples of high quality forests throughout our system. Both of them are either oak tulip forest, such in the case of Inwood, or oak hickory. And Cunningham is oak tulip, but also influenced by the glacial terminal moraine. So we're going to get different species in the mid and understories, such as spice bush and sweet pepper bush as two examples. And the NAC collected extensive data on forest health between 2014 and 2016 as part of their citywide ecological assessment. And I'm going to go into the findings on the next slide. Great. So what we found through inventory was that 85% of the forest is native in the canopy, about 80% in the mid-story, but only about 48% in the understory. And these characteristics for unhealthy forests, they have little to no regeneration, a lot of invasive vines in a lot of the outer boroughs, such as the Bronx or Staten Island, a lot of deer browse, negative human impact upon the land, and high ecological threats. So in these two photos for Alley and Willowbrook, there's big vine drapes through here that have taken down some of the large trees. Large canopy gaps that are inviting other invasives to take hold in the area and making it very difficult for the natives to thrive. Next slide. Great. So how do we help turn the curve? We employ diverse management strategies which work to make forests more resilient to climate change. We are looking at using climate adapted species palettes based on community types and the first tool. And the first tool is an app that was created by the NAC to allow practitioners to choose a planting plan based on deciding forest features, such as the type of forest or a list of forest types, or even just more general conditions. It's also important to look at sustainable trail building techniques as part of your management strategies and to assess and monitor forest conditions over time. Next slide. Great. And a next aspect of healthy forest management is the Forest Management Framework, which is a collaborative document that was created by NAC and New York City Parks. And it's a 25-year framework that looks at the full funding and support for New York City forests, advocating for forest health and the benefits of our forest play for people and the local communities. So this is another thing that in terms of our guiding document that allows us to help make well-informed management decisions for New York City forest in particular. Next slide. Great. So another aspect to forest management and health is looking at trail restoration plantings, which reduce forest fragmentation and ecological threats. I've really loved the fact that it empowers local communities around stewardship. And since 2017, we've planted over 6,000 trees and shrubs across 11 sites and about 6 acres. So a lot of hands on the ground to assist us with these plantings. And then next slide, Julia. Great. And then the last aspect of healthy forest management is sustainable and mindful trail use, right? So we like to look at this as a leave no trace model for mindful trail use. I love the idea of take only memories and pictures and leave only footprints. And we want to minimize our impact so others and future generations can enjoy our amazing natural areas in New York City. And we're also looking at the importance of mitigating some of those negative uses on trails, such as ATV damage that we're seeing within our parks or fire rings. And it also highlights the importance of community engagement and stewardship, right? So local communities can contribute to conservation and forest management and feel empowered to work in our natural areas. And with that, I'm going to transition over to Josh.
Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Just want to let you all know I do have a dog and I have a baby. There might be noises happening, but as of now, all is calm. Yeah, it's funny that Gabe made mention of that quote, take only memories and pictures. I was out with the scouting troop recently and they said the same exact thing, and that is directly related to the type of community stewardship work that we do in New York City. The way that I'm going to define community stewardship today is just directly related to the environmental community stewardship, which I would define as the care and conservation of our local natural areas, including nature trails, which allow us to access these spaces. And we engage with a number of community groups, but it's also just a variety of different New Yorkers. And I'm sure some of you have also attended a volunteer event at some point in New York City. And our work directly impacts our natural areas and allows us to be able to improve them and have ongoing care for them. Could we go to the next slide? One of the ways that we do this is through trail volunteer events. On the left-hand side, you see volunteers kind of very much in the thicket, bring back the trail corridor. And on the right is a group of volunteers at Inwood Hill Park that had removed a bunch of trash from the natural area. These are some of the events that we engage in, and it could be one-off events with volunteers. Sometimes it's volunteer groups, and also like on a non-event level, it's just us being able to go to these parks and be able to use them and practice leave no trace principles. Even that is community stewardship. We're being present in a park and treating the area with respect. Next slide, please. This is another volunteer event. This was a year or two back. It was, well, I would say 2 years back, National Trails Day at Forest Park. We're installing rustic check steps and to reduce erosion on a trail that was ultimately closed. And I think this trail may have been part of a trail restoration planting a little later on. So the steps to improvement are incremental, but opportunities like this allow for members of our community to be able to engage in some skills they might not have engaged in before, and take part actively in restoration work that's occurring in New York City. And we did see a decrease in events, obviously, during COVID, but things are picking back up in a really beautiful way right now, especially with the weather getting nicer out and restrictions easing. Next slide, please. Thanks, Gabe. Gabe plugged into the chat when it was planted. Along with engaging with various community groups, we have a number of environmental stewardship partners who we work with on both training and just coordinating to get work done in various parks throughout New York City. And just to mention some of these groups, the Student Conservation Association, Jamaica Bay Rockaway Park Conservancy, American Littoral Society, Van Cortlandt Park Alliance, Greenbelt Educators, various scout groups and friends of groups, and it goes on and on. There's a lot of people that are doing amazing work, and we're really strengthening our network when we come together to collaborate. Next slide, please. And this is just a shot of some of the Jamaica Bay Rockaway Parks and the American Littoral Society folks doing trail work at Jamaica Bay Park. They're doing some corridor pruning here. Next slide. And Student Conservation Association. Earlier days, so huge group, and we were able to clear gullies at Inwood Hill Park. And you get that many people together, you can imagine how much work you can accomplish in not a long period of time. Next slide. That brings us to the Superstore trail maintainers, which Gabe had mentioned earlier on. The trail maintainers are an initiative of the Natural Areas Conservancy, along with New York City Parks, with support from the New York, New Jersey Trail Conference. And there are currently 43 active Superstore trail maintainers in New York City. About 18 miles of trail have been adopted in 13 different parks in New York City. And these are advanced volunteers who receive training on trail maintenance, really basic forest management techniques, and navigating trails. They also receive permit to be able to work as often as they'd like in their trail. And it also allows them to engage with other members of the community if they would like to bring them out on the trail and join them. And another aspect of the program is Usually, if someone's adopted a trail in an area where the trails team has planned work, then we'll invite them out to join us on the trail to just get to meet the trails team and get to learn a little bit about what we're doing and actively participate in it. And it's been pretty awesome so far. I must say I've enjoyed it, and I know that Gabe and Isaac have too. Next slide, please. So for those of you that might be interested in getting involved in the Superstore Trail Maintainer program, you can visit the new Natural Areas Conservancy website, the Get Outside page. The hyperlink is there, naturalariasnyc.org/get-outside. Or you can go to the New York City Parks Superstored website. If you type New York City Parks Superstored into your search engine, it will bring you to the website. And you could also see some of the other different types of superstores that are active that you can become a part of in New York City. And then you could also just contact me with any questions that you have, and I'll plug my email address into the chat. And next slide. I think that's it for me, actually. So thank you all. Thank you all for attending.
Thank you so much to Gabe and Josh for that overview. I do want to encourage everyone to use the chat box for your questions. And there was a question from Sue about the Super Stewards program that Gabe just talked about. So Sue, let us know if that answered your question, because it's directly related to the Trail Maintainers program that Josh has talked about. Please go ahead and drop any questions in the chat that come into your head. And I do have a few questions prepared for this crew, because we talked about the forest health, we talked about building community and volunteering. We touched on why these things are so important for the health of New Yorkers, but getting more deep into how trails and forests help combat the climate crisis. Can the Trails team elaborate a little bit more on how this project specifically helps New York City become more of a climate resilient city through this program?
Great, thank you, Kristen. It's a great question. I think one of the factors that's really important about the plan, the Strategic Trails Plan, is that it allows us to see what all of our resources are and effort that we could put into maintaining and improving our trails citywide, and looking at the entirety of the network holistically and assessing, what needs in terms of maintenance need to happen, and looking at areas that are more ecologically sensitive. Our trail network, with all the data that NAC has collected and worked with New York City Parks on, we do know where these rare and endemic species are across the city that need to be protected, whether that's everything that's going on with ash trees currently and EAB or emerald ash borer, or some of the other environmental threats that our forest faces. And so trails also help, and a well-maintained network helps us as well in our work, is because it allows for access for monitoring and assessment of these spaces. And then lastly, I would say, in conjunction to all the overall forest restoration effort, a lot of times when Parks is doing a planting in a natural area, we're using the trails to bring volunteers to the planting or to access the area for restoration work. So really, not only is it for the public and the public good, because those health benefits that we get by being in nature, but it also helps us raise awareness about some of the issues along with the climate crisis in New York City, and to help combat that.
Fantastic. Thank you for that explanation, Gabe. We do have a question from Julia about how did the Trails team specifically deal with the desired trails? Like, what are the methods that you're using to create these unified trails that are easy to follow?
I could answer that one for at least what we do on the ground for them. When we see desire line, well, I'll just answer the whole thing. What we do for desire lines is, like, we'll look at the entirety of the system and have that as part of our management decision for whether or not to leave a trail open. We look at whether the trail might be redundant. Is it going through an ecologically sensitive area? and go through that whole process. That's usually Gabe, along with Marjorie Natick, one of our colleagues at Parks. And then we look at it collectively as a team. The decisions made along with the park manager, thinking about different community uses that the trail may have been used for. And then after all that stuff is done, then we get to the ground and we decompact the soil, and we allow for that native seed, hopefully native seed, to regenerate itself. We return to do invasive management in that area, and we camouflage that trail to the best of our ability to naturalize it with the rest of the space and hopefully prevent that ecological fragmentation.
Fantastic. So ultimately, when we have this network of trails available to us, over 300 miles of trails in New York City, wow, like that's exciting to think about. How is that directly going to benefit the health of New Yorkers, especially where some of these parks are located? I know that this team has some very interesting demographic work on where these parks are and the issues that those communities are facing, asthma, obesity, things like that. So as we start to create these opportunities, how will New Yorkers from all walks of life benefit?
Thanks for the question. Yeah, the trails, I think, as you know, different people have kind of said in this presentation, that they have been there for a very long time. And a lot of what our work is actually to make sure that people know that they're there, and that they're easy to navigate and they feel safe for people. So as I'll talk about a little bit in the presentation I'm going to give, is that the trails are really concentrated in the outer boroughs, and really a lot of it is on kind of really the periphery of the city. And that's partially because they've avoided development. And so a lot of the more built up parts of New York City don't have as many of these trail networks. So it's really a wealth, a resource for people who live in the outer boroughs and more on the periphery. And by making them not just safer, but also programming them to make sure that people feel like they belong there too, right? Because a lot of people say if you build it, they will come, but that's not always the case. A lot of times you do have to create a really inclusive environment to make sure that people know that they're welcome there. And so that's a big part of the strategic trails plan, as well as making sure that these trails are programmed, that they're accessible to people, that people know that they're there, so that they can use them for, I mean, the resources are many, are a myriad, but health is a really, really big one.
Absolutely.
And one other thing I'll say to that is that Josh, he has a community engagement plan, and we will be focusing on neighborhoods that have been kind of deemed as environmental justice neighborhoods, looking at different indicators of risk as to why they would be considered that, and we're kind of want to focus our engagement in those communities as well. So that kind of brings the justice angle in as well.
That's really amazing. And I can't wait to learn more about that community engagement plan when it's ready to be shared. We do have one more question from Dennis in the chat, and then we'll go to the strategic trails plan slides. But Dennis is asking about the trails and wildlife on those trails, because he's observed the swan family in most ponds he sees. So can this team elaborate on the wildlife and how some of that comes to be in the city?
Yeah, so happy to speak about that a bit. I think in terms of our restoration work and trails, it's important to note that, you know, our species that we get, you know, are from New York City or very close to New York City. And so by planting native species and helping to eradicate the threat of invasives, you know, these species such as spicebush or sweet pepper bush are familiar to the native animals, right, to New York City. So whether it's birds or small mammals, they've evolved to know that these certain species are here for them as food sources. So by, you know, having some of this come back, you know, with more abundance, you know, that will also help support like a higher carrying capacity in our natural areas to be able to support and sustain the wonderful wildlife that we see. And we've seen a lot of great stuff out on the trails as well. So that's another important piece of that.
Terrific. Julia, I'm going to pass it back to you to talk about the strategic trails plan. And just a reminder to anybody else in the chat, go ahead and drop your questions and we'll have an open Q&A at the end. So over to you, Julia.
Okay, great. I'm going to share my screen again. Okay, so as people have mentioned, there is a vast network of nature trails in New York City. And this plan is meant to guide the management of that network that's in all 5 boroughs. The plan was informed by months of inventory and analysis of the existing trails, and also an extensive public and internal outreach process with trail stakeholders. We're now in the implementation phase of the plan, and today I'll be telling you about the content of the plan and how we're working with New York City Parks and our partners to implement the recommendations. So this is a quick overview. So the plan really starts with that outreach that I told you about. It included numerous workshops and focus groups with the different divisions of New York City Parks. There were also 6 public hike shops, which were organized in the fall of 2019, which are exactly what they sound like. It's like going on a hike and talking about the trails, like a workshop while walking, which sounds really fun. Over 50 participants hiked the trails in all 5 boroughs, and their feedback revealed a lot of interesting insights into trail user perceptions. And there was also an open public workshop that drew about 35 participants. The plan lays out a vision for the trail system. It lists goals to help realize the vision and then goes into key recommendations to achieve those goals. It also quantifies the investment required to build and maintain a citywide trail system, which leverages public, nonprofit, and corporate investments to realize the full potential of environmental, public health, and recreational benefits for all New Yorkers. The plan also includes trail management and design guidelines that the NAC and its partners will use as a template for future trail work. And finally, well, actually, we'll talk about the management design guides later, but as I mentioned earlier, we have a 3-year horizon to build out the trails program in close partnership with New York City Parks, using this as our blueprint. So here's some research findings. So of these over 300 miles of trails, these are official and unofficial nature trails when we say over 300. So just to reiterate, a lot of those are or many of those are desire lines, which are also known as informal trails, meaning that people blaze them on their own with their feet, not with actual little blazes that we put out there. And it can, fragment the forest and decrease the health of the forest. So a lot of our work is actually, formalizing the trails that people should be on and making sure that people know which ones those are and that they are not confused about which trail they're supposed to be on. So you can see here that we really focus on the natural surface trails. That's over 223 miles. So that's where a lot of our focus is for this plan and for our work. Natural areas with trails, as I mentioned earlier, they're concentrated in 75 of the city's park properties that are located along the coastal edges in the Bronx, Brooklyn, Queens, and Staten Island. And that's largely because, as I mentioned, they have escaped a lot of the impact of mass development. And these are the 8 parks where the majority of trails are actually concentrated. So if you live close to one of these, go check it out. The vast majority of the nature trails are close to New Yorkers, actually 1.34 million New Yorkers. That's more than 15% of the city's population actually live adjacent to a park with a natural, natural area that has trails. Not all the natural areas have trails, for the record, if anyone is wondering. So this is the vision that we came up with. Using all that information from the outreach and everything, came up with this vision of a network of well-maintained, fully supported nature trails that provide a diversity of experiences for all New Yorkers and inspire an appreciation of the natural world. So something tells me everyone on this webinar can get behind this, right? Let's see. So these are the goals and recommendations. So The plan puts forth 6 overarching goals towards this vision of a well-maintained, fully supported nature system. And we plan to accomplish these by working together with New York City Parks and the support of other partners such as conservancies and other organizations. Each of these goals aligns with the recommendation. So I'm going to use this slide to discuss the highlights from the plan's recommendations as they relate to these goals. So the first one is really about standardizing the design and maintenance of trails as a critical first step for a successful trail system. So we're planning to support all stakeholders working on trails, in-house staff, partner organizations, and volunteers to formally adopt the design guidelines that I'll go into in a little bit for caring for nature trails. We're also working to establish agency branding for nature trails, the same way that kind of pools and beaches and dog runs have their branding. We want that for trails as well. So that's a big part of goal number 1. Number 2, we're working to build out a network of advanced volunteers that Josh talked about them, the trail maintainers, to support trail maintenance citywide. So trail maintainers adopt a segment of trail to perform basic maintenance. Josh will also be working on creating a tiered system that gives certain trail maintainers the opportunity to learn more advanced skills and provide a higher level of maintenance on their trail segment. And this is already underway and we've been working with the Stewardship team at New York City Parks on this, and we already have over 40 trail maintainers helping to support their local trail networks, which is really great. Number 3, so the NAC is working with parks to formalize the nature trail system. It's a lot of what we've been talking about today, to make it more legible and consistent. So by using consistent and uniform blazing, signage, and by making maps publicly accessible, we can ensure that trails are easy to navigate and are welcoming to people. This is also important for the health of the forest, as Gabe discussed, because a lot of these unofficial trails make the system confusing and can deteriorate the health of the forest. So we're also working on making trails more accessible for people of all abilities. And one of the things we're doing is working to inventory all of the ADA accessible trails that currently exist, and including as much information as we can on trail maps so that people of all abilities can decide whether or not a trail or a park is the right place for them to go, so they can make educated decisions for themselves. And number 4, we want to work together with parks to institutionalize nature trail management by establishing roles and responsibilities for trail inspection and issue tracking. And we're working with parks to roll out some new kind of trail management tools that will really institutionalize and standardize trail care across the city. And number 5, as I talked about earlier, programming is really important, and making sure that the trails are recognized in programs in our continuing partnership with the Stewardship team, who host really big volunteer events, but also with conservancies and local organizations like friend groups. We want to make sure that any active community groups or institutions know that the trails are a resource for them, and create more inroads even with local schools in order to connect students with the natural areas. So that's a big part of the work that Josh is doing with community engagement. And number 6, last but not least, we're working to ensure full funding of the Trails program. It's a high priority. Without increasing internal and external funding streams, these visions, goals, and recommendations that are here in this plan can't really come to fruition in a meaningful timeline. That's a lot in 8 goals, but we've had 8 focus groups with the different divisions of New York City Parks to ensure that our implementation strategies for these recommendations are in line with the work that they're doing, and that we're working in concert to reach these goals in our 3-year timeline. So I mentioned the trail management design guidelines. So just very quickly, what are those? They include how to assess actually if a trail is a desire line, if it should be formal or informal, and how to maintain and care for certain types of trails. It includes some basics like standard clearing limits, cross slope, linear grade, a lot of these kind of slightly more wonky things, but very important for people who are maintaining trails. It goes through the different trail structures. So Gabe talked about like a punch-in, for example. It kind of goes through some of the specs of what is a punch-in and why do we need it. And it even goes into tools and equipment, the types of things that you need. And one of the things that we're actually right now trying to roll out is a maintenance checklist that just goes through, what needs to be done on the trail and in what time frame, and making sure that everyone is using the same checklist so that the trails really get the care that they need. So, oh, I had one more slide, but I'll just tell you about it. So, again, thanks to the Helmsley Trust again. Oh, here it is. Thanks to the Helmsley Trust again for their visionary investment in this program. And we also need many more partners and supporters to fully implement this ambitious plan. And we lay that out in the Strategic Trails Plan. And we hope that those of you who are here today will become partner and support us in bringing this to reality. One of those ways is by becoming a trail maintainer. So if you're interested in stewarding a segment of nature trail, reach out to josh.otero@naturalareasnyc.org. Also, find a trail to visit. Go to the New York City Parks website. Someone could drop that in the chat. That would be great. That's where all of the official trails are. And get outside. It's a perfect time of year for it. And if you can activate your community on the trails, that's even better. Are you part of a community group or some sort of local institution that you think could really benefit from using the trails? Then get them out on the trails. Go for a birding walk. Just go outside. And if you want to do it in a more organized way, Josh again would be a really good person to contact about that. And finally, if you're moved to support our work, please donate to the NAC at naturalareasnyc.org. And thank you so much. This has been a pleasure. Oh, and follow us on social media, of course. How could I forget? Thanks, everyone.
Amazing. Thank you, Julia, for that overview. I would love it if Josh could elaborate a little bit on the Trail Maintainer program, because there is some activity in the chat about that, but for anybody not looking at the chat or wants a little bit more insight into what that program offers and what the requirements are and how they can get involved in that, I think this would be a great opportunity to share that.
Oh yeah, so for the Trail Maintainer program, I work very closely with Jason Stein. He's the Advanced Volunteer Coordinator at New York City Parks. There are 4 tiers of advanced volunteers, one of them being trail maintainers. So what we would do is you attend a New York City Parks Stewardship Superstore orientation. After attending the orientation, you are then eligible for the training and adoption of a local nature trail. So once you attend the orientation, I'll follow up with you and we'll figure out which formalized trail is closest to you or which one you have most interest in adopting. We then work out a time for me to meet you, and I'll meet you on the trail. You get set up with some tools so you can perform the activities that you'll be trained on, and you'll also receive a map. And the map that you'll receive is not a front-facing map like you would see on the New York City Parks website. It's the same map that the Citywide Trails Team uses for our projects. And this map is going to help with guiding work. We're going to take a walk and assess different trail conditions, learn what these different conditions are, how they could be remedied, learn a little bit about the different invasive species that are on your trail, and just develop those skills. And once we do that training, we'll get you permitted so you could do that work ongoing. And you're also open to receive future trainings. As Julia mentioned before, we have a tier system. So we're looking to add more types of development. And we also encourage through this program, local community members to feel empowered because they are to take care of their natural areas and bring people on board to do so. And I'm here and my team, we're all here to support you with doing that.
Fantastic. And there's a link in the chat to all the places you can find this information online, plus the parks stewardship events when they're up and running again. Awesome. Well, I have one more question for this crew before we wrap it up at the hour. What is your favorite natural areas trail within the New York City 5-borough area and why? We'll start with Julia.
Well, of course I'm biased because I love the places where my team is working. And so I know that the team has actually been doing some really cool rock step work. And even though I can't go out and lift rocks, I'm just like really, really excited about these rock steps. And there are a lot of them. There are a lot of rock steps in Inwood Park, but they've also been working on some new ones, and I highly recommend checking them out. Inwood is such a gorgeous park, and it has really just a lot of topography up and down. If you want to get your heart pumping, it's a good trail system to visit.
I love this question. I think it's changed a couple times over the years, but I think as of 2021, I would say Hunter Island and Pelham Bay Park. I mean, it used to be an island, just still named Hunter Island, but it's it's one of the most beautiful areas, to hike in New York City once you really get into the forest. And what I love is, or one of the things I love the most about it is that it's kind of the southernmost extent of the New England coastline, and what we think of in like the rocky shoreline, great wetland views, and large contiguous wetlands at Hunter Island. So there's a lot of just general diversity in the forest and really beautiful views that make you feel like you're not in New York City and that you're transported somewhere else. So that would be mine. And there's two trails there, the Kazmirov loops that are there, the red and the blue one. So they're blazed and ready to receive anybody who wants to go check it out.
I'm biased because I live out in Rockaway and I enjoy it very much, and I try to not have to leave as often because it's a bit of a pain sometimes. But I don't really have to because there's the trail. The trail I really like is Jamaica Bay Park, the Blue Trail. That was the second trail that I worked on with trail construction. It doesn't happen often in New York City, but that was one of them. So it's like you could take a ride across the peninsula from the beach over to a really nice maritime forest. It has one of my favorite views of New York City, and the ecology there is just beautiful. It also has a cool view of JFK. So I would say that's my top one.
Jamaica Bay is beautiful. I have to go with Cunningham Park personally because it's an amazing place that's got a lot to explore, and you can also ride bikes there. So there's so much in New York City. There's so much to do here. We live in an amazing city that has so much to offer, not just the city, not just all the things the city has, which is everything. New York City has everything. We also have great outdoor recreation thanks to this team, thanks to people who take the time to make these projects come to life, to take care of these spaces, to volunteer, and to just get outside, make the effort to go and enjoy them. Tell your friends about it, post it on social media, let people know that they can utilize these resources for themselves to improve the quality of their lives. And yeah, let's get this done. It's going to be an amazing project. This 3-year plan is a vision that's here, and it's a reality, and I can't wait to see it come to life. So thank you so much to this team for your time today, and be well.